It's like, "What? You got your act together." So just asking that one question. How'd you get there? How'd you deal with your struggles? How'd you deal with your time? So everybody has trials and tribulations. And or you push yourself to the problems. We're just starting to get down. It's a little bit off camera about me, but tell me your story. All right. So, um, let's see. It's like, man, where do I even begin? Right now I'm at Offutt Air Force Base, and so family advocacy intervention specialist at Offutt Air Force Base. And my colleague Dave Deckent, who's an organizational psychologist, and I founders of the skills group, so we do management leadership training. Also, Carm, Dr. That's a lot of work. She's great Gallup's strengths specialist. And yeah, I don't know when did we get here. I'm from South Dakota and went to Jamestown College in North Dakota. I usually impress people with that. Right? People are like, well, you don't know, that's the Harvard of the Midwest, the Harvard of the Dakotas. Well, seriously, I went to Jamestown because my high school coach was up there or was from there, and I didn't have a lot of prospects. My father passed away when I was 15. Didn't have adequate life insurance, so my mom started having three kids. Suddenly, all these worldly possessions that they'd acquired from, a house, 3 acres of land. The business owner had a bar with his brother, and my mom ran that. They threw out her 20. He worked at a meatpacking plant. But in the 80s, everything was. In the mid 80s, you had the farm crisis, which was the community right outside of Sioux Falls where we lived in. Then you had the meatpacking plant industry was in turmoil. And then my dad has cancer and dies, and while the union's on strike, doesn't have adequate insurance, and so there's all this trauma. And so my mom ended up selling off everything and working in the grocery store deli for the high beach because if you can work regular time. So in the meantime, my dad's sick and he's dying, and they sent me to the Catholic school in the city. Sioux Falls is considered a city when you grow up in a small town of 900 people. Because she thought the nuns should straighten me out. Not that I was a bad kid, it's just kind of mischievous, doing some things that I'm not going to share. Just mischievous. And so they sent me, and so went to college, Jamestown College, got my bachelor's in psychology, history and political science, got a certificate in secondary education, got a certificate in coaching, which sounds like a lot, but I went to Jamestown. There wasn't anything else to do except to study and to train. So I did a lot. And when I graduated, I started teaching back in Sioux Falls. And at the Catholic school? Yep, at the Catholic school, right? And so I felt like a complete fraud much of the time because you gotta understand, I wasn't a great student. I mean, I wasn't terrible. I mean, the top 90% possible. It's kind of where I sat. But I didn't realize the education I got and also there was a change, right? When you start finding something you're interested in, it's like, I can really get into this. Most people say, I'm not a reader. I don't like to read. Like, you just haven't found something you're interested in reading. Much of the time, it's like, because once you find something, it's like, oh man, yeah, you can't put it down. And I think most of us can think of like what one book really made me a reader. But anyway, so started teaching, coaching. I coached track and field. Yeah, so I was in college. I was a 400-meter runner. I would take you back there, Coach Reno. It was right after Christmas break, and we're looking at the board. It says 6 easy miles. Dress for the conditions. No, it's going to be 22 below with the wind chill, right? Negative 22. We came over thinking maybe we're going to do some strides in the gym or something, right? We just came back from Christmas break, and the coach comes out and he's like, "Oh no!" So by that time, Coach Greeno, he was already in his late 60s, and he had 2 knee surgeries, so he kind of hobbled when he walked, and he kind of had this squeaky voice, but Vince Lombardi type mentality, that comes from coaching for decades in the Dakotas. And he comes wandering, and he's like, "Boys, well, like," he goes, "There's no such." I'm like, "Coach, it's like 20 degrees below zero." And he's like, "Sir, there's no such thing as bad weather, just soft people." And I'm like, yeah, like I told you, I grew up in the tropical Dakotas. Now I'm taking a look. So I'm taking a look, and I'm like, oh, I'm thinking, what are we going to wear? But coach, it's really cold. And I'm not the only one. A couple of other guys are kind of chirping in. And he looks us in the face and he's like, boys, you can run at anything if you dress for it. But coach, and he gave us the hand and kind of waddled back to his office. I went to Jamestown. I didn't get issued anything, right? We got champion cotton sweats. It was the same size for me as a distance runner and 400 hurdler as it did for my roommates, which were shot put throwers, right? So everybody got the same oversized. And then we got these orange plastic jackets. Because in 1990, we didn't have Gore-Tex. It was plastic, you know. School colors were black and orange. But I think it's because so that we could be seen while running on the roads. So we went back. I remember going back, putting on socks, putting on a bandana, and over my face so that, I could handle that, gearing up and running and bitching the whole run. This is crazy. At that time, we were bitching because we thought the coach was talking about the weather. It took me some time to realize he was teaching his boys about life. We got all sorts of Greenoisms too. Some that I could share with you, others that I can't. I realized that there really is no such thing as bad weather, right? Weather's not good. It's not bad. It just is.
What's that Shakespeare quote? And neither good nor bad. It's just our thoughts that make it so, or something like that.
And take a look at a young guy in his early 20s. And at first I'm bitching, I'm complaining, but it wasn't until the end of the season in which I was better prepared. Actually, running and conditioning gave me greater confidence that when the weather conditions were bad in the spring, which they always are for a track meet, I always felt like I was prepared for it because, man, I trained in worse conditions than this. Right? There wasn't any stuff lead up. It was like you got to throw in. And the interesting thing is we don't determine whether something's good or bad. We don't. Right? Weather's not good or bad. If it doesn't fit what I want, we got good. People say, "Oh, yeah, great weather today." Oh, yeah, because it's not rainy. It's not. But if you wanted rain, then you'd say it's bad weather. Farmer's problem. Yeah. So it's like there's no such thing as bad weather. Just some people, and you can run in anything you get dressed for it. And I realized, I could run in temperatures that were like with the wind chill up to 20 below. Geared up. And so I later took that on. I mean, hey, if I can do it physically, maybe emotionally, if you dress and you prepare for the conditions, you can handle just about anything, right? And sometimes it's just getting through it. And then you find that you don't know when the growth is going to pay off. So I went back, started teaching high school, but was really interested. Why is it that some kids perform and others didn't? As parents, we see that. So that's what led me to get my first master's, which was in clinical social work at the University of Missouri. So went to the University of Missouri and got my degree master's in social work. Spent the next several years, most of it under the umbrella of Charter Behavioral Health System. I did some inpatient counseling, outpatient counseling, people with problems, yelling and that kind of thing. And one of my frustrations, though, and then I was also working for the state of Missouri, the very violent psychiatric population, in the Biggs Forensic Center.
That's how you get to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the Biggs Forensic Center, man, the clientele was either guilty by reason of insanity or the arrogant person who received the training. Wow. And my unit was the BA, Biggs 8, which was the anger management. So while most of their units are separated based on your mental health status and your conflict with the law, mine was the anger management ward. You're just too violent to be any place else in the building. So we had a mix of temperaments.
Some security there was pretty.
Yep. You got staff, you got aides. If you think about like the metal shows, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or the old ones where the aides are all wearing white, and apparel and stuff like that. Well, there's very specific reasons for that, right? It's not just for TV. It's because of all the monitors. And so when you would see a rush of movement, your folks in the control room couldn't tell what they're really looking at. But if they see a rush of white, that's where they can call their codes. Goes red, BA, yeah, because you see the rush of white, the unit staff at the time making their way in. Yeah, well, we don't, but I think they still, that's a good question. It's been a long time. It's been, decades since I've been back.
Well, that's one of those things like the analogy about the monkeys. They're not analogy. It was the test where the monkeys were climbing up a ladder to get a bundle of bananas, and every time they climb up it, they get sprayed with water. Mm-hmm. And they start replacing the monkeys until none of the original subset was there, but they still kept yanking everyone off the ladder. They still are white, but no one knows why.
Yeah, they might. So I was interested, but I was getting a little frustrated, especially with the. So when I was working in mental health outpatient, let's say, Ryan, you come in, you say, "Hey, Dale, I got a problem, and I need your help." I'm like, "All right, See, we run on a medical model, counseling psychology does. So you come in, you say, hey, I got a problem, I need your help. I say, great. Do a little assessment, do some paperwork, let you know you've got great insight, or you don't just have one problem, you actually got 5 problems. Go back to your childhood. I'm finding problems you didn't know you had. But don't worry, I'll get you to normal before your insurance runs out. And it's will give me about 10 sessions, right? Now, I joke a little bit about that, but or there are some more serious conditions and things like that. I'm in that field of time. But there is a little truth to that because we've been studying it for so long. Why does managed care happen? Well, it's because they're studying it, they're researching it. At what point, can we get over many of these, most all of these conditions? And that's the dirty little secret about psychology. We've been studying it like crazy. However, we have a lot of theories that work for most people most all of the time. And that's actually what is going on, right? And so that's why with a lot of confidence, I can say, hey, I can get you to normal. Now, one of the problems that I was having, and again, this goes back to me being a collegiate athlete and being a coach, just because you're normal, just because you don't have problems doesn't mean you're thriving. Just because, things are good doesn't mean you're having great success. We kind of got this idea of what we understand as a baseline. We don't go seek help when we seek help when we're really in a tough spot. Just because I don't feel bad doesn't mean I'm thriving. Just because I don't have problems doesn't mean I'm excelling. And that was my frustration. And I was kind of in that quagmire. And this was about 1998, 1999. And a high school buddy of mine, Castle, Dr. Castle, he's actually working on his PhD in biochemistry. And the school he went to is like, you guys are probably more familiar. Yeah. Well, yeah, probably. So the Air Force was paying for his PhD, and he's like, Dale, you should look at the Air Force. Now, my first thought, again, is like, the military's not going to want me. Right? I'm a social worker. I was a high school teacher, and I take one look at my history and go, put it to the side, because if we bring this guy in, he's going to have our military personnel in share circles holding hands, talking about their thing. So I'm like, dude, this is not. Why would the Air Force want me? He goes, well, all we ever talk about, his response was, all we ever talk about is performance psychology. He goes, and the Air Force is looking into that. I said, yeah, and they got social work positions. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, let me take a look at that. And I was in Jefferson, I was in Central Missouri at the time. So
This is pre 9/11.
this was pre 9/11.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I took a look and came on, and off it was my first assignment. So, and that actually happened to be a big blessing because in 1999, the field of psychology took a little bit of a shift. I told you before, I can get you to normal before your insurance runs out. The reason being is because since really the Institute of Mental Health, which was stood up right now, have been studying what's wrong with people very diligently and how to get them there. Right? We've been studying it since World War I. You have certain issues, conditions, lead you to be traumatized, and get you so you're not traumatized anymore. Well, I was taking a look, and in 1999, when I came into the Air Force, and Seligman became the president of the American Psychological Association. Now, this was an interesting time because he challenged the field of psychology. He understood we've been studying what's wrong with people. A lot of our education, self-esteem, all this stuff didn't come from studying high performers. It came from studying what's wrong with people. And so much of psychology follows a medical model. How to keep you so you don't feel bad, not how to help you thrive. And until Martin Seligman challenged the psychological community, let's start applying the science of psychology, these outliers of higher performance. What makes life worth living, thriving? Now, there were some pockets of that, but it wasn't getting funded. And so what gets funded gets most all of the attention. Fortunately, also, I was in the military. The military was looking at that. Dr. Hamilton had come on in 2001, shortly after September 11th. And said, hey, we got this playground. He was also interested in it. And so started exploring that in the Air Force, here on Air Force Base. There were several programs that we did under the Storm to Excellence program that was recognized as Air Force best practices. And that really expanded because you've been in, it's like you get a couple of really talented people really thriving on something. And then as your talented NCOs or officers leave, this great program you got started withers. And not everybody has the same knowledge, same background. So yeah, so that's what I did then from 2000 or from 99 through 05. Started really studying that. And so that became my interest, that performance positive psychological stuff. 5 separated is in 2002, went through divorce. And in 05, I had an assignment to Guam. But that assignment would have cost me primary custody of my boys. Right? And when everything was pretty much split, they were with their mom on Mondays and Tuesdays. Awkward situation. Decision making, everything else was, you have that hand one overseas. I would have lost custody of my boys. I wouldn't have had them. With been swinging weekends. None of that. And in my mission statement that I identified when the relationship was one key. The nation's most successful life enhancement program through speaking, writing, coaching, and consulting, and be living examples. 3 years into this mission statement that I crafted. So it made for a very simple decision. I mean, it wasn't easy. This was my career, but it was very simple. World-class father came before, everything else. So for me, it's like, all right. And then what else does a world-class father or like going into, remarried, found somebody else? Even when going through the divorce, people were like, hey, why do you have a husband on there? But I was helping other people write their mission statements. Well, I don't plan on being single forever. And how does a world-class husband handle the history that I had, right? Do they bring previous baggage in? No. Okay. It's really having a mission statement that's really useful.
Unpack that.
Mhm.
That was around 2002 that you came up with this.
Yeah.
You hear more of it today, but 20, 25 years ago, that wasn't as big of a thing. What drove you to come up with that?
Well, actually, truth be told, I was helping people craft their own mission statements as a clinician because my clinical style was more coaching, mentoring than it was, hey, tell me about your feelings. So I was actually helping people about a year and a half craft their own mission statements before I crafted my own. Talk about the height of hypocrisy. As we preach and promote. But yeah, so I've actually known about its value. During that time, Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was really popular. We were talking about Stratcom earlier. Stratcom had a very strong professional development program, and actually they had the Covey series. And so that was something a lot of people were doing there. And like I was watching it make a difference. Who's the author? Was driven like, yeah, right. And so, yeah, I think his book came out though about quite a bit later. But again, you start finding having a sense of purpose, having a sense of meaning. It kind of helps make all your decisions big and small.
One thing you talked about it kind of in passing a few times is the disconnect between normal and abundance, or whatever word you want to use. Living an extraordinary life, living what's normal. That's my biggest issue with. I can't just. I would love to go to somebody. However, I can't. It's expensive. I'm not going to pay $150 to sit on the couch for 45 minutes an hour. Maybe I'm just cheap. But I don't have that diagnosis that, can get insurance to pay for it. And I don't like to pay a $30 copay or whatever it is. And so it's that disconnect of, I'm too cheap to pay for it, but I don't have the insurance that would pay for it. I think you would prevent problems from happening. And I think that's where that life coach thing started to come into play a lot more. I just feel like medically, they should offer some kind of life coach. I know some, like my company, I'm sure offers three per year or something. I don't know into it, but what can be done, I guess, for the person that wants to exceed more in life? And then do you see a change in medical field going more to that? Let's help people excel.
I think there's a couple of interesting models out there that's really conflicting and fighting. So I think your audience is probably more towards the mentoring, the counseling. If your company has an EAP or an employee assistance provider, and they can provide that counseling, it's already covered. And I gotta be careful with this because we have in the mental health field, you have a high rate of depression, anxiety. And you got a lot of your not a lot. I think it's like with anything. You've got good performers and bad performers, and you got why isn't some people going to certain professions, certain fields? And it's like, well, I would like to help out other people, but I want to help make people better. Like for me, I was always interested in performance and thriving. But so there's a lot of people that go into that and say, well, I want to go into this because people are interesting and I'm a mess and I want to figure out how to get myself unmess. And I thought they would all get weeded out. Unfortunately, they don't. And so what I found, especially in the arena of mental health, or at least early on, because if you were going into mental health and you had your own issues, you were not attracted to the military. In fact, you would have some hangups with the military in the military. But when it comes to having a sense of guidance, I mean, there's great mentors, coaches, life coaches, people you admire, groups of people do the kind of things you guys are doing. It's like, wow, you got your act together. So just asking that one question. How'd you get there? How'd you deal with your struggles? How'd you deal with your trials?
Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody has trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
And the more you push yourself, the larger the problems become. I mean, dealing with them's the same. Like, I had an 18-year-old, and I was horrible in this when she was probably 12, 13. She's worried about make up something stupid.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is nothing. Like, there's no reason to be stressed about it. But where I was failing to think about it was, that's very real to her.
Uh-huh.
As a 12-year-old, the stress that's causing her, even though I think it's nothing, is very real to her. And so as you grow to see it in business and life and stuff like that, I think the feeling of the stress changes. It's just how big the problem is that you're dealing with. And so,
yeah. Well, here's one of the things you have to choose your stress because our body is designed for performance, right? You guys are like PTSD, right? Yeah. Have you heard of post-traumatic growth?
I've heard there's been studies on it recently.
Yeah. Well, I didn't discover about post-traumatic growth until I separated in '05, started focusing on performance psychology, and my own mentor had helped me out. He brought me back to family. I was doing outreach, the education, promotion. My job is to study what makes relationships great, how to raise great kids, and then share that in the airport. And I thought I'd be doing that for a few years because I just started the PhD in human capital management, which I'd love for you guys to call me doctor the rest of the seminar, but it'd be unethical because I didn't get an extension on my dissertation. So I finished with a very bloated master's degree, or what academics call ABD. Got a couple of publications, got published in a couple of works, during that time. Kind of coming back, and I kind of lost in my train of thought there.
You talk about post-traumatic growth.
Post-traumatic growth. It was actually in that research, right? So it wasn't until 2010 that I realized, what the heck is this construct, post-traumatic growth?
Is that when it started coming out?
No. Tennessee and Calhoun had been studying that, and their first publication was in the early 2000s.
So I know there was a study, and I don't know when it came out, of Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
So people, John McCain, people that was in Hanoi Hilton and stuff like that. There was more senators from the Vietnam era, military era, that had like John McCain being, that's not name, that had post-traumatic growth. Like you would think someone that was in Hanoi Hilton, tortured, shit, I was like, when he first got there. So he had all these things, but he had another post-traumatic
growth. So another study, like in 1981, so this was Yale was part of the study when they published it in '81. They had been following POWs, right? 61% said they did better because of the experience.
Victor Fromm's answer for meeting. I mean,
that was an expected read. My boys have read that book, Yeah. So in '81, they found that 61% said, I'm better because of the experience, not in spite of it, better because of it. And 18% experienced what we now call PTSD. At that time, we were calling it PTSD. And there was some consideration that there was like a head trauma and stuff like that involved with that 18%. Now, it doesn't mean that 61% are all like, hey, life is great, wonderful. No, some of them still had some anxiousness, some anxiety, still had some physical injuries that they were working with. But what they talked about when it came to growth was, hey, you know what? I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. Things that bother other people don't bother me that much. Their risk tolerance was a lot lower. So they were, so you had actually more millionaires, self-made millionaires, also more business failures, but also feeling I've got the efficacy, the self-confidence and self-efficacy that, hey, as bad as it is, I can make this work. I'm going to just keep moving forward because how bad can you hurt me? I'm a POW survivor. And so what you find is, even with their physical ailments. So that's post-traumatic growth. And one of the interesting things is when we look at traumatic experiences, you take a look at the outliers, people that have great lives, these outliers. Once we started to apply the science of psychology to that population, we started researching them rather than just leaving them from like motivational speakers like Zig Ziglar and Tony Robbins. Right? What we found is that they're not there in spite of life difficulties. The stories look good. It's like, wow, look what they were able to do, how they were able to pull themselves up, or how they were able to navigate this in spite of this difficulty. Time and time again, they're actually there because of those difficulties. The very same experiences that individuals that are experiencing lasting problems say, well, I because this happened to me, and I'm using it now as an excuse for being stuck. Because this happened to me, I'm this way.
Wasn't there a study with twins on that? They followed like 5 sets of twins or something. So highly successful. The other twin is like, and they asked them, why are you this way? And he said, because my family. Both of them said the same thing. And, it was on multiple. I am this way because my parents suck. I am this way because my parents suck. Maybe that is the answer. My parents are too hard on me or whatever it is.
Yep.
But you can.
And
So going back to what we said earlier, it's not the weather that's good or bad. It's your perception of the weather.
And then how you handle it, how you deal with it, how you condition for it, right? Absolutely. And so that study, I'm not really familiar with the twin study, but it sounds like, you can do that with about any family.
Yeah, I don't know what
Any successful individual.
I don't know if it's a real study or someone just made up a story for.
Yeah. So post-traumatic growth, it's a very real thing. And then when you start taking a look at the human condition, we're actually wired and designed to get stronger, to get better, to grow from difficulty and challenge. It's requirement. So growth is a struggle is actually a biological requirement. I think one of the most common examples is physical activity. You lift, you can know how to lift to get stronger, but you don't get stronger by knowing it. You got to go do it. And you don't just do it and show up. You got to do it until you hurt and then do another set, right? Do a rep until you feel like you can't do anymore. And then you still do one or two more. And that's where that pain, that struggle, your muscles tear, but then they heal back. Well, it's the same thing if you want to learn to do anything. So this was an exercise, that I had to drop a pen over 1,000 times before I got this first spin. A lot of people can do that. I remember when I was in high school, I knew a couple of guys that were in debate, and they in class, man, they just looked smart because they could do the spin twirl. And so I remember going home and trying to, and I couldn't do it. And so I'm like, all right, well, I'll do this because I can do this, right? This was easy. Everything from the spin to in learning, you have to keep doing it so that area keeps getting stimulated. And pretty soon the brain goes, well, Dale keeps firing the areas in this area. He's straining himself. Only then does it send the myelin. Yeah, exactly. Only then does it send the neurosteroids and the hormones responsible for myelinating that pathway. But it doesn't myelinate until it is extremely uncomfortable. So myelination learns from extreme discomfort. The problem is what myelinates doesn't care if what it's myelinating is helpful or not. So when people go back and they replay an event and experience, well, to some degree, you actually relive it. We know that the body responds, and every time you go back and you replay it, depending upon and then your interpretation of the meaning of that is actually then what drives your feelings, right? Not the event itself.
That part of I could be wrong, but psychedelics and stuff that they're doing a lot of studies on, a lot of veterans with PTSD are going.
I don't know singing.
And they're basically causing the brain to fire new pathways and circumventing the trauma, if you will. Is that kind of similar to what you're talking about?
I don't know that specific, but it sounds like it would be. It sounds like they would be going back so that when you go back and you replay it, you don't have. Many of us think we see the world as it is, and there's an instant in which we interpret it, we make a quick assessment. But if they're changing the meaning of the experience,
I know,
it's kind of like exposure therapy. For one, and you can desensitize yourself because you keep exposing yourself to an event that at one time was traumatic because of a one-time experience. Well, now you start building more and more moments of having that same experience or a like experience without the bad outcome. Pretty soon now this becomes your new pathway.
That's interesting. As we're talking about this, I thought about it. Caveat that. Dakota Myers, a Marine, got that medal of honor. Anyhow, he's one that he's an advocate for, and he did it and went to Mexico or wherever he went. So I just find it funny. I read recently he just re-enlisted in the Marines a few weeks ago, somewhere. So here he is, like talking openly on podcast about drug use and
listen. Oh, he's still active.
And now, well, I mean, he wasn't then. Yeah, he had a break in service, but now they just allowed him back in the Marines. I just find it funny to he's medal of honor recipient. There's a lot of good, and you get the good publicity from it. But interesting.
So with us being business owners, real estate entrepreneurs, a lot of stuff that I'm kind of working through and trying to figure out is setting up our trust and how we can say, I feel responsible for my kids' kids, at least have a leg up. We've seen how detrimental a handout is for kids, especially. And so one of my biggest fears is providing them with too much support to where they don't have the opportunity to go through those life struggles and develop the character needed to preserve it. So I think this is obviously more common when you talk about like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and all the substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
But Warren Buffett's leaving 1% of his wealth to his kids, and so that should be more than enough. I mean, that's still $1 billion.
But his kids are like 70, so
Yeah, now.
So not as applicable to us with young kids. But what do you see as far as the silver spoon, being detrimental towards kids? Or you see a lot of stories of young athletes that get up into the pros and then they blow it all, or lottery winners. It's all insane.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack from that, because there's so many different studies and so many different things going on from the lottery winners to kids. It's one thing is you can teach your kids about money because, well, we don't have any money. It becomes tough when for a parent to say, I'm not going to buy that for you because I'm not buying that for you. Oh, man, you can afford it. So, I'm not going to. You're right, I can.
I can, but you can.
Yeah, you're right. I can, but I'm not going to. That's a little bit tougher. I think as parents, we don't want our kids to have a better life than we have, but we've operationalized that in giving our kids an easier life, right? And I was telling you about the psychology of focusing on giving our kids a better life. So we give them an easier life. We want them to be happy. So doing the things that will make them happy. Well, instead of doing in the process of trying to make happy people, we're trying to remove difficulties and challenges and not realizing that's the very thing they need to have only to be happy later. Because the toughest thing a 12-year-old experiences, you were kind of talking about it, it's like her clothes or makeup, something like that. But that's because that was the toughest thing that she'd had up until that point. And then the next tough thing will be the toughest thing. And if she has, and this is what we learned from the folks that experienced some sort of trauma, the post-traumatic growth. They had something that also was so traumatic and so difficult. One of the things they had to learn to do was accept it. Man, I can't change this. All I can change is me and how I react to this traumatic experience. Those that can't accept it, they tend to tumble off. Missed expectations has us all the time asking why. I'm now drifting off from your talk about the kids, but for raising the kids, I'm a big advocate. Well, you give them tools and experiences, and as often as possible. So sometimes they're too young to really form. So how do I teach them about choosing good friends? Because we don't how to make money, how to make decisions are reflective on your friends. Do I wait until they're 12 and they're making friends? So one of the things that's really useful is taking advantage of the storytelling, the stories at night. If you've got toddlers and really young kids, well, we know that bedtime reading is an incredibly useful tool. And it's part of the routine. It settles them down, gets them prepared for bed consistently. Brush your teeth, let's read some stories here first for bed. But now you're also reading them stories, so you're having that connection. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how me or mom or dad was. We're now reading, we're having this wind down time, we're having this connection time. If you're a busy parent, make sure you're carving out time at the end of the night to make that connection with your child. And it starts early, but it can continue on. My boys continue to do it into high school. And that's one of the things when Riley decided that he was going to, I shared with you, decided he wanted to go live with his mom and go to high school in Spearfish, South Dakota. I was like, no, we need to keep this routine that we've got. But so you kind of have this nighttime connection. The other thing is the most prominent information out there on academic success is early and frequent reading. Well, if you're reading with your children every night, they start reading up on it. They find it cool. And so some of the books that you read are going to be these early readers. Right? The Big Pig, Dad's a Jig, until they can start to do that. But then also make sure that one of the stories, even when they're really little, because they're just making a connection with you, is on character. The character, the traits that you want them to have. And so that at night before they go to bed, they can get the same message each night, every night. So that by the time they're 12 and they need to make a decision on, how to choose a friend, well, they've already made that decision hundreds of times. And so it seems pretty simple to them. It doesn't seem simple to their friends. Otherwise, if you're waiting until then you have to deal with that moment. So like teaching them about financial responsibility, you can have their characters do that in the stories. And I think I talked about this a little bit off camera. But with my boys, with my dad having passed away when I was 15, my dad died. My uncle Dan, whom I named after, passed away a month after he did. My grandfathers were gone by the time I was 12. So me, I'm like, I live right. For me, I had 42 was the height of male adulthood. I didn't project myself getting up much past 42, and I was 15, and so that what I kind of set as my mark. That my boys are ready for the world. Being a history major, I studied that. Well, we're only a few generations removed from 15 being old enough that you didn't have to continue on with high school. You can start working. You can since we've been giving our kids an easier life, we've been removing all the very things, the struggles and challenges that help them to mature and grow. So now the first time they experience something that previous generations experienced earlier, they can't handle it. Academics know this too. They're calling it adolescence, and it's what they're seeing in 20-somethings in college and how they handle the world that previous generations experienced at 16 and 17. And so they were ready for it. It's like an extension. And don't tell me college teaches you about the world. We pay for that experience now. Well, we pay for college too. But I mean, what is it? It's an all expense resort, and it's all inclusive. You pay for a dorm. You got a dorm. You got food facilities that are open at all times. Oh, it's all your same age peers all up and down that road. This is awesome. You want to go to a climbing wall? Here you go. Some universities have lazy rivers in them. It's an all expenses paid inclusive resort, and they think that's work because they go to class 10 hours a week. They're expected to be in seat. They study on their own, a couple hours. Yeah. So adulthood, we push that off. So one of the things coming back, I'm bouncing all over the place. Yeah. But with the childhood thing, frequent early stories, and that's why I'm writing the character collection, right? And each one of the characters right now in the stories that are about to come out this week, by the end of the week, is Sophie, is my second oldest. She's a little older from Sophie to go from Eloise the bunny. She's my 5-year-old granddaughter. Is the youngest. He's a little badger character, and then Arthur is just a wild woodland character, kind of a cross between a bear and aardvark and a squirrel. So we call him a woodland wonder because there's already the Arthur character from PBS. I'll already get into any trouble. Yeah. But that's Riley's son's name is Arthur, and so each one of them are representing different character traits under the rubrics of psychological capital, which are 4 constructs: hope, optimism, efficacy, and resilience. So each one of them exhibit one of those specifically. But as they go through in these stories, they run into things that help them develop their character so that individuals can read that book. And when their kids are little, we get pre-name understanding. You read it, and instead of reading Sophie, you read your child's name. Now their child is experiencing what Sophie's experiencing, but it's their name, so they feel a greater attachment. And then that area of the brain, as though they're actually having that experience, is triggered. So it imprints.
A book like that, and all 4 characters in there that exhibit different character traits.
Right now, each book has a different character with a specific. Okay. Yeah, so each one is a main character. And then I've also got a series that right now is just in writing. Active duty folks when you get deployed. And so there's kind of a preface so that our folks, let's say you're getting deployed, it's like, well, man, I just got to get through my deployment. And so you FaceTime your kids and you call and say, hey, how are you doing? If they're real little, they're just swirling all over the place. And you feel like, and you can't discipline your kids. So you feel like you can't parent your kids. If your goal, as mine was, is to have your kids ready for the world by 15, there's certain character traits to have them in their possession by the time they're 15. So then they're ready for the world, right? Now, I'm not having to teach you and tell you. You've got the character traits, and I'm asking you, so what do you think that's a good choice? What are a couple of other choices? A couple of options to solve every problem. That was the goal at 15. So you start reading these the stories of the characters that they start to develop those traits. Awesome. The one that I'm doing for the military. So we don't think, well, hey, your nighttime routine is reading books. Why don't you just record yourself reading the book and flipping the page? Now, each night before your child goes to bed, they still have that same night character-based stories, story time with mom, story time with dad. You're playing it, and there's and it cues you when to turn the page, so the child can turn the page. Dad's reading the story, and they're turning the page. And once they get up, so here's let me take a because these are the ones that I'm really excited. I'm working on this. I've been working on. Actually, it's been an idea for years, and I've been telling people to do so. So here's like story number 5. And I'm calling it the character audiobook series because you create your own audio. So you do it first when you got the book, you're sitting down with them. So, and there's a parent monologue that the parent can read into that. So it's like the child when they're little, it's like, it should be before story time, the same kind of little breakdown you would have. And it's like, hey, so here's an example. Hey there, Braveheart. Today I saw something that made me smile. Someone who didn't give up, even when I got hard. They messed up, they got money, tired again. And that reminded me of Sophie the Gopher. She had a really big idea, but things didn't go quite right at first. Want to hear what happened? And so you can actually read that in before you get deployed. And so Sophie the Gopher woke up with a plan. I'll dig the best tunnel that ever began. It would twist, it would turn, it would loop like a vine, and it goes on. But it's about, this digging in and being persistent. So there's that.
You said this comes out this week.
No, this one here, the other stories are coming out this week. The one with each of the grandkids. This one is probably going to take a few more, probably another month because I want.
This week, around the time this comes out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Yeah,
Pretty close.
so it's a picture book. It's designed for the 3 to 7 range. So they kind of flip it.
So how do people find these? Are these on Amazon? Are they...
Yeah, it's gonna be self-published on Amazon.
Links from the description.
This is all self figuring out.
Yeah. So this was, and this became, I needed to start writing it down because my son Taylor, he's like, Dad, you gotta put down those books. You gotta put down the stories. And he thought I was reading from somewhere. I'm like, no, I just gotta make them up. When I have a family, I want you to read these stories.
Going back a little bit, you talked about kind of how the stigma around counseling is detrimental, and you see it in movies all the time that, laying on the couch and just complaining about problems. I mean, like you talked about, parental principle maybe is that there is a certain percentage of clinicians that are probably not doing, the best for the clients, or the patients rather. Do you think that the stigma around it is accurate, or is it kind of an unfair assessment of when people need to go out and get help? And especially we talk about mental health in the military, which is a huge issue.
It is kind of an issue. I mean, we're seeing that stigma being taken away. In fact, we now have a population that they're using their mental health as an excuse or a reason. Bad behavior, stuff like that. So yeah, they'll go to a counselor, but they're going to a counselor because I'm seeing a counselor and this kind of continues to get out. Yeah. But then others that don't, it's like, well, what if I go to somebody and they tell me to do something? Right? Some people know what to do. They just don't have they don't have that extra push or gumption to do it. So I think for some, there are some bad clinicians out there, and I think what's happening a lot is people are going to clinicians that aren't good for them. Right? I mean, what vehicle do you drive?
Ford Taurus.
Okay, so why don't you have an F-150 truck? Right? If you're not hauling stuff, it's like, man, that's a lot more gas. It's you have what fits for you, right? It's kind of like, well, what vehicle? Small SUV? Why? Because that's the best fit for me. If I got into a sedan right now, I'm like, this isn't a good fit for me. Well, it's sometimes the same. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but it's kind of the same thing for therapists. Now, you hop in and you start talking to therapists, and you think they're all the same. You think their style is all the same. So if you're going to go to a therapist, I think find one whose style matches your goals and your objectives.
Do you think that, maybe it's a chicken and egg scenario, but because of this perpetual victimhood of people coming and just, looking for compounds, is that causing clinicians to kind of be dismissive and then lowering their standard of effective care?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, you talked on several things I could get in front of the line. I've heard it talk. We start talking about victimhood culture, and yes, it exists, but what percentage? We can't globalize it. What percentage of it is, and all of that.
And I think that to say the victimhood culture, like you said, there's people that use it a lot of times. For my time in the military, I came in 2013 and 2023. During that time, we call them the sick call buddy. Because they're just constantly finding a reason to get out of PT in the morning to go to sick call and whatever. And I can't do that because of my anxiety or whatever, it's becoming more and more common because it is a valid excuse because we do prioritize mental health.
Yeah.
And in order,
I think it's because it's more socially accepted, like it's talked about more. So
right.
Mhm.
And because you can't just, there is an ethical issue with having to differentiate, oh, they're just faking it and then something happens. And, so I understand that perspective, but it's like in real estate, we have professional tenants, people that learn how to beat the system. They know that when they don't have to pay their rent, the people that learn to beat the system make it much more difficult for the ones who are truly trying to provide good service.
So you're talking about these, the sick call money, that person that's always sick. What percentage is that? And what happens is you start projecting that as being the whole money rather than just,
it always seems like
10%.
more than it actually is.
Yeah.
I guess I could take it from another area. How do you find a good clinician? How do you find that person that's right for you?
Well, I think you got to take a look at your, your goals and your objectives. If I'm making a recommendation, for me, it's the methodologies that they use. Because sometimes you'll have like clinical social workers, such as myself. We have 2 years, we get licensed independent counselor, but most of my counseling experience with therapist comes after my schooling, right? So there's not a lot in the schooling because there's so many other things that need to be, so many other classes, programs, and things like that in the education. How do you find one? I think you got to take a look at what your goals and your objectives are. For me personally, the most effective tools out there, anything under the cognitive behavioral models are the most effective. And I'm a big fan of the ACT, or the active commitment therapy. One is you kind of acceptance and commitment. So you have to accept a situation is what it is. Right? The early Stoics and your religious, everything from Buddhism to Islam to Christianity has some version of acceptance, which itself is an incredible super. Right? And the serenity prayer. Lord, help me to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, the whole prayer itself is a beautiful prayer, but we mostly miss that one point. And so the acceptance community says, hey, what are your goals? What are your values? Where are you going? And then accept your current situations, your current difficulties. Mindfulness is very highly in the cognitive behavioral therapy. A CBT model, which is your activating events, then your release of those events, actually drive how you feel and what you do, which is why we can all experience the same event and have very different responses to it. Why? Because your interpretation of it is, why was that guy getting such a jerk? You're like, oh man, that person was probably just busy. You're going to be irritated and angry, and you're going to be like, huh. Your beliefs, the meaning that you make, how you feel, what you do, predominantly. So, and intuitively, we know that. And intuitively, you already know that because if we're going out, we go out and we have a drink, and you're like, Dale, it's just like this. I know I'm hearing what you're saying. What you think what Tanner did wasn't right, but did you think that maybe he meant this or he meant that? Because intuitively, you know that if I change the way I think about the situation, I'll change how I feel. So we do this all the time with others, but we are terrible advice takers for ourselves because I feel it, and boom. Because I feel it, it must be real. And because I feel it strongly, it must certainly be the truth. And it's not. It's just that belief, that B between the A and the C. That B that's driving the C.
That's what we always try to with kids. Tell them your feelings are real, but dissociating the behavior that comes from the feeling. You can be angry. Being angry is a feeling. Punching the wall is a behavior associated that you're saying, I did it because I'm angry. No, you did it because you're mad. But and so that's what we try to disassociate the behavior from the feeling.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to encourage you you want them to have emotional control so that they can feel bad, but make sure they're feeling bad to the right degree. Right? How do we being angry is easy, but being angry to the right degree, in the right way, for the right reasons, for the right purpose, that's not so easy. And that comes with how do I interpret each situation and know that, like, my mind is like, okay, so what are the 3 ways to look at this? How might you respond if you felt that way? So everything from the stories to then some of their early life experiences condition them to see it and know that different feelings can be associated from the same event, seeing it different ways. And not in a clinical way, but in a fun, playful way, taking the stop.
No, I was going to say, I heard something similar to that recently. Instead of talking directly to your kids about them, talk to them about their friends because they'll be more giving with information. And then ask them, well, what's 3 things your friends is defensive? And
Yeah.
so they just kind of play off of what you were saying.
That's a good one. I'd always ask that. So what are 3 things you would do? I guess I would sometimes do that when my boys were little. And again, I was trying to get them ready by 15. One thing that I know from marketing and advertising, if there's a message you want your child to have, right, you introduce it to them. Something that's important enough for you to sit down and talk to them about it. And then as a parent, we think our job is done. No. You want your child to behave the way you desire, and you're sitting down talking to them. In the next 24 hours, put the message and the desired behavior in front of them 5 times, right? So it's in the story that you're reading later that night. It's that, hey guys, could you be quiet? I need to talk to your mom. And they're like, what is it? Now they're in on the conversation because you just deliberately made a scene about them being quiet because you got something important to say to their mom. I don't want you guys to hear this. They're coming in. Or you sit down at the dinner table and you go, hey, I had this interesting thing that happened today. What do you guys think? What interesting thing happened to you? And then you share that story there. You're watching TV and you pause the TV and you say, hey, do you know why this is your Uncle Wayne's favorite part of the movie? Because every time Hercules keeps getting knocked down, he gets back up. He doesn't quit. Anyway, because my brother, their Uncle Wayne, he's always super cool. He didn't have married until late. He's the one that bought him a battery operated Jeep, got every loud toy that I didn't want him to have. So like, hey, so then they pay attention to that at night. The other thing is now we have this. It's like you ask the older sibling, maybe you can help me out. How do you think your sister can handle this? I got this video. Now she's watching the video, but the area of her brain that's being stimulated is one for attention and learning, which is in the prefrontal cortex. If you ask her, hey, honey, there's something I want to talk to you about. Now, I think you need to hear from me or you can watch this video. Well, right away, they're like, oh, this is comfortable. Yeah, and that area of the brain that gets triggered because her heart rate changes. So the blood's flowing to the amygdala, which is that fight or flight response. And so they're just wanting to get through it. So the area of the brain that's going to contain it isn't being stimulated. Now, if you ask them for their advice, now they're thinking differently, and that area is actually getting programmed. Kind of similar to, and that's what made me think of that specific example was triggered when you're talking about the friends. What really helps out is when you ask a younger kid, hey, I'm going to share this with your sister. I don't know if you're old enough for this yet. Maybe you are. I want you to watch this, right? Or any idea that you want to talk to them about.
That's incredible.
Manipulation.
I do have a question about that, but first we're talking about how different people can experience the same event. Do you believe there's an important distinction between perception and perspective?
Perception and perspective.
Yeah. So the example I've heard this, I don't know if it was a human one, but they're talking about this car accident.
I sound a lot like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's done a good job of bringing a lot of stuff to a practical, usable level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something about, if there's a car accident and 2 people witness a car accident, one say that there was, a dog in the car and it was a red car and it hit the trunk, whatever. And then the other person will say the dog in the car hit the truck. And it's basically a difference of if I think of perspective as where the 2 people are standing, he saw the dog first, this person saw the vehicle first, and then noticed the drivers. But the perception, comes down to more of what caused the accident. Well, the dog was in the way of the field of view and they caused the accident. So in looking at any kind of issues, especially we talked about when kids are raised experiencing the same traumas, how their perception of an event is changed by their beliefs and their prior experiences, whereas the perception or perspective of the events is from their lens. And so 2 people can witness the same event, but they have different things they notice first. So have you, I might be going off on a tangent, but.
Well, I think, yeah, and I was wanting the differentiation because I'm certain there is. That would be something for me to explore because right away when you say that, I believe there's probably a difference, but I blend them.
And I think typically they are blended, and the distinction to me, I just try and think of I think of the perception as the angle of what you're looking at things or the perspective, and the perception is your internal beliefs of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So one does influence the other. Your perspective would influence your perception. Right.
So that's something I want to.
But it doesn't determine. It simply influences.
I've never seen that question. You responded back. I have to look into it. I have to study that. So you're already established in your career. You've been doing this for over 25 years. How do you stay at the cutting edge of Because there's no external thing pushing you to
Yeah.
further your education. That's kind of my problem with doctors in general is you got your medical degree 50 years ago and you haven't taken another class since then. So how do you stay relevant in your job so that you provide the best care for your patients or, just watching podcasts or whatever it is? What's kind of your take on that?
Well, for me, what I do is not a job. The job is how I am who I am. And I mentioned my mission statement before. Before I got into this and this avenue, I was an officer in the Air Force when I wrote in my mission statement, I'm going to be a world-class father, husband, friend, and leader, and I'm going to provide the nation's most successful life enhancement programs through speaking, writing, coaching, and consulting, and to be a living example of fitness, character, is what you'll see in me. And that's a faith statement that kind of encompasses everything.
So you have like all the things to correct your stuff as me in your
Yes.
in your
Yep. Yeah. And my buddy Pat and I, we call it the silent 10. 10 words, when we were cross country runners, in Catholic high school, we just had to do this. Like instead of a high five, this would be our 10. And we did connect. That was your silent 10. And it's Philippians 4:13. But yeah, so it's the mission. So going back to your question, it's really the mission statement. I don't just, I'm certified Myers-Briggs trained facilitator that can use the tools. But that's not the only personality tool, right? If I wanted to be good at understanding personalities, I might get into this one system and become an expert in the system. But my goal is not to be an expert in the system. My goal is to provide the nation's most successful life enhancement programs. What other tools are out there that are like a Myers-Briggs? You got the DISC, you got Gallup strengths. There's a lot of relations, a lot of stuff with Gallup strengths, who's using what. And so it's like, keep exploring, keep exploring, keep exploring. There's a lot of clinicians out there. Again, my model and methodology is more coaching and mentoring as kind of clinical work. And I don't do much of that. I haven't done much of that for quite some time. Well, that I would call clinical. I do couples counseling, relationship counseling. I for my model more as coaching. Clinically trained, used to do much more therapeutic style model.
Is there an important distinction between being a clinician, psychologist, a psychiatrist, other than just the degree level?
Okay, so yeah, there is the degree level. I don't know if I was really clear in my description earlier, but yeah. So you got your therapists. There tend to be master's level licensed therapists, right? And there's a lot of colleges and different kind of counseling degrees. Now, many people want to get into counseling, and then they are a little dissatisfied when they get this counseling degree that there's no money in the jobs because your insurance companies won't pay for many of them, right? If you want, you got to kind of be what's kind of referred to as the big three: social work, psychology, or psychiatry. So that's why for a long time, active duty military, they don't. You could be a, but they don't hire therapists, right? So you come in as an officer. You're an officer. You're social. You got social work billets, psychology billets, psychiatry billets, because of the education, the testing, and so it's just more. There's a credibility issue there. So social workers, other counselors, they tend to be master's levels, 2 years of education. They get licensed. They do it. They follow a particular model or methodology, a therapeutic model. Psychologists, PhD level, they're more specialized. They've done a dissertation and become an expert in a small, narrow window, and maybe done also some training on particular therapeutic models. And in psychiatry, well, that's your medical provider. They got a medical degree and they focus on.
And you mentioned before when we talked about the dissertation that you wanted the knowledge that could be acquired through going towards your doctorate, but you didn't really care much about that, PhD at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Is there a categorical difference between having that PhD at your name that you've seen in practice, or is it that you believe in the good that you're able to provide?
Well, believe me, I wanted the PhD at the end of my name. Right? You definitely want that because that's a mark that says, hey, you've done this, you've checked it off. So help me to understand this.
Well, so for example, right now I'm studying for the LSAT to go to law school, and I don't intend to ever be a practicing attorney. I don't know that I'll ever, try and pass the bar. but I want the knowledge that can be acquired by going to get my JD. And if I get all the way to the end of my senior year and decide that I'm not going to finish that last year, I've acquired the knowledge for it. And my value is that's enough for me. That JD is nice, looks nice at the end of your name, but it's not something that I attach a ton of value to. And I'm just curious how that works in the medical field. If that on the PhD and then also the institution you get it from matters.
Yeah, it does. It does, because there's a certain assumption that's going to come whether you got it or you don't. For me, I pursued it because of my interest to become, to provide the nation's most successful life enhancement programs, to speak, writing, coaching, consulting. My goal was not to get a PhD, but I still ran into the same, I'm an idiot, I'm a loser, if I don't get this. And it was very, very rigorous, and so that's why it's a little bit easier, I think, for me, because of why I went for the PhD. And that was one of the vehicles I used. Now, if you want to use law school as a vehicle to get there, you got to ask yourself, how much am I willing? Am I going to get that kind of a return back on my investment? Now, I had the post 9/11 bill, and so the military helped pay for the predominant part of this PhD, which is another reason why I feel a certain amount of loyalty and commitment to continue to work with the Department of Defense. I'm using this because I got paid to do that. If I were paying for it on my own, I probably would have just doubled down on what I was and continue to do, which is reading lots of books. I was consuming books at a high rate. We talked a lot about reading and listening and maybe some other classes, stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that helps out, because it was the avenue that worked for me because I had it. Right.
Well, and the segue that I'm getting to, are you familiar with the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey? So my favorite movie, I'm still trying to get him to watch it, so I'm gonna put it on your to-do list too. But in the movie, he's an astronaut and he's faced with the opportunity to fulfill his life's purpose of going, in outer space and going on this big mission. But in doing so, he left his kids under the care of his father. And there's a whole, general relativity concept and time dilation, and he winds up losing 50 years and comes back, his kids are grown and all this stuff. And so one of the notes that I have was in relation to man's search for meaning, and that life's meaning is not always found in personal achievement, but in responsibility to others. And because you already had laid out your life's purpose, your mission statement, you had a core set of values to weigh every decision that you were making against that. And if pursuing, or going back to school again or a PhD or whatever that was, didn't fit that mission statement, then you have a lens of which you can make that decision. And I think too often people don't have any set of core values to weigh that decision. But I'm curious if you thought about that in relation to man's search for meaning.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think that's why in organized people are like, well, you don't have to have an organized religion to have a relationship with guidance. Yeah, but what's your framework, right? What rules? I have a mission statement which helps me, and it's influenced by what's kind of creating the guardrails, so that that helps you decide what is your sense of meaning and your sense of purpose. You mentioned Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Fantastic read. I encourage anybody who watches the podcast, and I encourage everybody else to read the book. One, it's an easy read too.
Especially the first half.
Yeah,
The latter part.
yeah. Well, that's what because he's the father of logos therapy, right? Purpose-driven therapy, and I've seen a lot of people just be frustrated. But once you have a sense of purpose, and you start moving your actions toward that purpose, all of a sudden it's like, oh, things start to clear up. Their mind is not busy thinking about all this other crap and overthinking what might happen or could happen. They now have this sense of purpose. They've got this, and it changes the direction of their thoughts. Thus, it changes how they feel what they do. And the sense of purpose and meaning. Viktor Frankl's book can kind of also think how we get there. I use Stephen Covey's model of having a personal mission statement. There's a lot of tools out there.
Well, and some of the powerful things, if I'm not mistaken, was Viktor Frankl, like right at the beginning of when he went into the camp, he threw away his wedding ring. One, because he knew that they were going to steal it from him and kind of spend off of it. And two, it was like a token of acceptance that his wife was gone. And I think that through that, and then maintaining the positivity, they've done many studies on how the people who made it out of there were the ones that were certain that they were going to. And they lived every day knowing that they were going to get out. And so, some people kind of manifesting, some of it's, opportunity searching. But I think that there's been a lot more studies now as far as the body's ability to heal itself through that power of positivity.
Yeah, and thinking, or even having meaning, a reason for them going from day to day, right? It's like, those that chose to help others, that chose to be, the comedic or whatever, it's like, okay, they tended to sacrifice themselves. And it's like, oh my gosh, you're on the cusp of death, but yet you're giving your share, your portion to somebody else. How in the world do they sustain? Well, they're sustaining because of that sense of spirit, because of this, and that actually fills me. I don't want to confuse my stories, but I'm pretty sure it was in Viktor Frankl's Revelation, which one of the guys that he observed me just like he was done with it. He's like, I'm out of here. I can't stand this anymore. And people, it's like, I can't stand this anymore. I'm just done with this, right? Kind of that I'm just exhausted. I just want to quit. I just want to give up. And they watch you like erratically leave the barracks. They thought, okay, he's going to run for the fence. It's his death by suicide. So they kind of followed him up, but he didn't take off. Right? He actually then went to the side of the barracks and just kind of put his back against the wall and just kind of leaned down. And the time they got to him, he died, and he just quit living. And I'm pretty sure it is in Viktor Frankl's book, but the author said that's when I knew that it's a decision.
I see a lot of
3 stories from like personal. My senior year, it was the second day of my senior year. Walked into school in my first hour period. Teacher died. He was older, probably in his 70s or something like that. And his wife called the school, and I went to private Catholic school as well. And she called the school and told the school during the conversation, I don't know if I can go on living without her. She died that same day. And one of my grandmas, she was born in 70. So she was older. She always told me, I'm going to live to be 100, I'm going to live to be 100, I'm going to live to be 100. She made it, 97, 98. She died right before 98th birthday. The night she passed, my mom was there, and she said, Mom, you lived a good life. She passed away 30 minutes later. My other grandma, she was passing away. So I got the phone call, and, mom was passing away. I said, I'm going to go make it there before she goes. Anyhow, she was about to go to coma, and she heard him saying Ryan's on his way. In my opinion, Ryan to pass away until I got there. And as I was leaving the hospital, after getting there, she, I don't think I was out in the parking lot before she passed away. Yeah. So it's just like, I do believe that, like I said, just from those 3 personal things that I've got to witness, that the mind is super strong in that regard. When it's your time, it's your time. And you have some say so. To some degree.
And I'm reading a book right now about experiences and talking about like going through the tunnel, and they all have similar stories, and they take the scientific approach, saying, well, it could have been this, but this is the testimony of this person, and they have so many cases of it happening over the last, I think, 40 years. Yeah. And the overall theme of the book is like, is it possible that all of these experiences of people who have never met in opposite parts of the world had a similar experience, and they're all justified by science? And so I like that kind of stuff. The one thing that with all the training and knowledge that you have, is it something that you feel like you can turn off, or do you have you're constantly reading people?
Yeah. Well, I think that it helps and it hurts because everybody's reading people all the time, right? That's one of the crazy things. It's like a lot of issues with psychology. It's like, well, I'll think about something, think about it over and over and over and over again. He said, just stop thinking. But I'm going to think about it when I'm experiencing. So turning it off, I think it helps me to make assessments, but we're always reading. That's one of the interesting things about the human condition. We're always trying to interpret what's somebody else thinking, what's their motivation, right? And so, yeah, I use it and I got it turned on a lot. Also, I think it's helpful because it kind of helps you to understand everything's to degrees.
Well, then, is there an ethical boundary there too, where, if I want my kids to continue doing something and I just decide to give them an amendment every single time they do something I like, is that, it's using
like the Bang Theory, right? Even Sheldon stuff.
But is there using classical conditioning, even if it's not with malice, with, manipulative intention, is that an ethical issue?
That's a good question. Because I think we live our whole life using the information we have to try to get the results we
I
want.
think you're always manipulating everything in some way, shape, or form.
all the time. Yeah. So we're always using what we know to get what we want, right?
Whether consciously or
Yeah.
subconsciously.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the answer that I have for myself, which I don't know if it's right or not, is intention. Is if the intention is good, which I mean, there's a much deeper conversation there. But
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We probably haven't got
Who says your intentions?
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Are you using it for good or for evil? Chris Wallace, never split the difference. Love that word. Now I'll share that with folks for communication. So you can use it to improve your communication. And what I like about that is they understand the person. But then it's like, well, are you using it to manipulate them? Are you using this technique, which works really well, maliciously or not?
You mentioned that. One of the funny stories in the book is where he's out on the boat, him, his son, and one of his coworkers. And the guy's literally using Chris Voss's technique against him on the boat, manipulating him, just asking all these open-ended questions. Finally, his son, Brandon's like, has enough. He's like, Dad, are you not realizing what he's doing to you?
Yeah. And so that's something too, because in some people it's just in their nature, which is why they're a success and they're a natural success. Sometimes they're just naturally successful because we stumble on certain methods or something like that. That is kind of how that person is.
So one of the writing questions, I got a bunch, but I'm filtering through them, was what do you see in this world through your line of work or perspective that is broken and do you believe is beyond repair? What actions or mindset shifts need to happen in order to change or repair that in society?
What stuff in our society is broken? Yeah.
I mean, I think some of the common themes that we see coming up is the effect of fatherlessness in homes and, trauma responses, how important parenting is at a young age, which you've multiple times about. I think that us looking at the education system and the influence it has on our kids and their beliefs and how they see themselves growing up, as well as the subconscious things that they're picking up from the shows and the YouTube videos and stuff. And we are very protective about those things. I don't know what the one size fits all societal fix for all that is.
I don't know either, especially with the prevalence of this.
I think the problem, not to pick on the questioner, but I think the problem with society is in the question. What I mean by that is like, let's put everything in our perspective. And like, we're always right versus searching for what right is. And so when you ask that question from that frame, you're saying that my way is right. And everybody has to, it's my way of thinking. And I guess that's my problem. I'll pick on America with this, with our always pushing our doctrine out to all these other nations. We're telling all these other nations that their way of life is wrong. Their religious beliefs are wrong. Their, social context is wrong. And ours is right. So we're going to make you like us versus just being a melting pot that America was formulated on. So my soapbox for the moment. So
yeah, I mean, I don't disagree at all. We talked before the podcast about, and that's one of my favorite parts of studying for law school is just
I like studying them. I don't like being in them.
yes, absolutely. Yes. But I think that it's important to study them because we don't know how we'll react in a specific scenario unless we've already addressed it. Like if you're working out, track and field, you don't know how to jump over that hurdle unless you trained for it.
Yeah.
And so the same, I think, is true with your mindset of being ready for these kinds of ethical dilemmas because they're constant. And we talked about the more drastic, examples of, if you could cure cancer, but one of your kids had to die, would you do it? And then there's obviously the trolley problem. Are you familiar with that? So it's basically there's one person stuck on a track, and then there's 5 people stuck on another track, and the train's heading towards the 5 people. Do you change the direction of the track to go towards the one person, rather than kill 5? And the whole, I mean, there's utilitarianism and deontological, was it deontological? I said that word wrong. But perspectives,
some big words.
Yeah.
but perspectives of decision making. I think that, identifying those things and bringing that all back to books, Race and Lions is about practical ways to be better parent to the kids so that they grow up to think on their own.
There's a lot going on, and I don't even know how we're going to keep up with this kind of stuff. And when I say this kind of stuff, I'm talking about the technology. It's proliferation.
our knowledge based on the technology too. It's like, I felt prey to that. Like, I got to know it all because it's all at my fingertips. Some podcasts last night before, and I'm like Googling stuff in there, like, or not Googling, ChatGPT, and like going way in depth on all this stuff. And it doesn't really matter. Just,
And then and I'm doing that while my wife is next to me playing a game, and we got the TV on, and we're watching it, the latest Mission Impossible, so we're ready when we go to the theater. Yeah, and there's no connection there.
yeah, my wife would read something. But yeah, it is interesting that we do that. Like at the TV, I got this going, my wife's reading next to me. We're all
kind of
going 800 different directions.
Yeah, even though we're in the same place.
That's fine talking about the mental health institutes. While I was watching a show last night, I was talking about it, and they were talking deeply about the presence of demonic spirits in those facilities. And my mother-in-law worked at one for many years, and just through God's grace alone, she wound up. Her and my father-in-law moved up here. The week after they moved up here, one of her coworkers was stabbed and died at the facility. So Nicole and I were talking a lot about the presence of demonic spirits and that it's not the people themselves that are inherently bad; it's their spirit. And obviously, us coming from a religious background, I do believe that there's a lot of truth to that. So I mean, what should people be doing in their daily practices to combat those inner demons that if they don't build up the resilience to will overcome them?
Are we actually talking like demonic possession kind of thing?
I think there's a range there.
Yeah, there's a huge range because there's just our psychological discomfort. I don't know if you noticed. I don't know if that came up because of the Saint Benedict medal that you observed that I was wearing. Saint Benedict is the patron saint of education, but it's his name that's invoked in the Benedictine order that does the exorcism. And the prayer is actually on the outside of the medal itself. So each of these letters represent the start of a Latin verse, that is designed. The Holy Spirit lead me. May the dragon always follow or never be behind me. Satan be gone. What you tempt me do not tempt me with your vanities. What you offer is evil. Drink from the poison cup yourself. So those are the essential English words that come from the Latin. And that's what's often invoked in exorcism. And so it's interesting you said that because the breakfast group, the guys I get together with on Fridays, we were just talking about that. Had brought that up in one of the chapters we were on about. There's something out there, and it's beyond the understanding. I mean, psychology, we'd like to think, again, we know it works for most people most of the time. But our dirty little secret is psychology doesn't know everything about everything. There's some interesting stuff out there. I think too. That's where I think being spiritually healthy, having good faith, having good community makes it really helps to protect you. I think.
dog barking and scratching. Everything else, she's normally pretty quiet, but she's been a little noisier this one.
Yeah.
So I know Tanner's got 200 questions on his phone. I do part two most time after the book release. Do you have anything? I guess
Yeah.
How do you find if I'm watching this and I want to see the books? How do I find them?
Yeah. That would be it. I mean, this is the first time I've even talked about it because I haven't yet been published.
But they
The only ones that know about it are just my kids. Yeah. Yeah.
Tanner is looking at tangents.
We do a lot of just one-on-ones, and we'd love to go on tangents. So
Yeah.
we appreciate the insight, and glad we were able to get you on.
Yeah, because there's so many different. I mean, there's so many different areas. Like you kind of touched a little bit about on education. Things changed through the 90s and 2000s. Focus on kids being healthy and happy and emotions, and basically we started making life easier for them, removing the obstacles, the very challenges that they needed. So rather than giving them, pushing to the point of almost being frequently uncomfortable, we've taken away the discomfort. And so, yeah.
So I think the answer to the last question that I had, to me, it sounds like everything that you're doing with the books and everything, putting those in a daily practice of keeping positivity and positive character building, in front of the kids is probably, I would say, one of the most important things I gathered from this.
I think appreciating that struggle is normal. Actually, struggle is a requirement. So what is it you want to struggle at versus I don't want to be uncomfortable? Because the new study in research on stress, well, stress as it's coined was first coined observing a rat's reaction to being stabbed. It turns out they don't like being stabbed, whether they were stabbed with a hormone or they were stabbed with a saline solution. So the reaction was the same, and they called it the stress reaction. Well, in most of the medical research on the body's response to stress isn't even done with humans. It's done with cats, rats, and dogs. And then they extend it to humans. Because the difference between humans and animals is when you are experiencing something stressful, is you change the meaning and you change your biological response. The performance of an athlete versus somebody who's anxious, the anxiety response is almost identical, except for, well, I shouldn't say the body clock. When you change the heart rate to go from being a little bit erratic, kind of that startled, you're breathing shallow. Well, that's why rhythmic breathing works. Not because the rhythmic breathing calms you down. You don't want to be calmed down. Rhythmic breathing, your breathing rhythm talks to your heart. Your heart rhythm goes from being erratic, closing up your vessels and sending the blood flow to the amygdala. So you got this automatic fight or flight response. But your rhythmic breathing then changes it so that your heart rate is still at like 110 beats per minute, but it's in rhythm, which is synced up to what we see with high profile athletes. When you're in flow, when you're losing time because you're excited about something, this is excited. This is anxious. Physiology isn't much different except for your heart rate. And once your heart rate changes, the blood goes to the prefrontal cortex. And now you're seeing things on the periphery. What other options are there? And so like everything from world-class athletes to our special rhythmic breathing is so important, not because they want you to be less stressed. They want you to be better stressed. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the big thing. We don't want fewer problems. We just want to be better at handling problems. We've had a society where we're like, okay, well, we don't want people to feel these stressors and struggles. I think we're going to have a bit of a shift. And if we don't, only those of us that understand that struggle and challenge is part of the growth process, we're going to continue to develop our environment, our communities, our kids, and you're going to get a greater and greater deficit.
Choose your heart, right?
Yeah.
Which it's funny. How things resonate with you hearing it so much. I've said on the podcast so many times, I didn't even realize like that I've stolen it from other people. So,
Yeah. Choose your suck. Yeah, that was one more officer had used that term. I'm like, I'm not saying choose your suck.
well, Dale, I really appreciate it. And pleasure meeting you. Pleasure chatting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, man.